an example to help crystallize that for you. I worked with a group up in Seattle just shortly after the Occupy movement started. And it was a group of people who they'd been a long time in the advocacy community and on moving people together. And the leaders of all these groups got together and decided that we got to get ahead of this, and of course they were already behind it because that's how they do. But their whole thing was, we've got to have something to say about this. This is an opportunity for us to talk about economic justice in a way that we rarely have the spotlight, so let's move on that. Let's create some educational pieces, and rather than all doing them separately, let's come together and make one so that we can take advantage of the collective wisdom and so on. So I remember I went to the first meeting, and the people from all the things that were set up to make the educational piece for the whole city, and it was 10 white men in their 50s and 60s, one white woman in her 60s, and then me and a Hispanic woman, and that was the group. And they went through this process of sort of naming, they're like, we want a society that's inclusive, and we want a society that is diverse and that takes advantage of all these different things, without recognizing that the values that they were espousing for the future, they were failing to practice in that moment. And there's a great example of how our social location and narratives can be so at work at us that we're not even aware of how they may be undermining the very goal or outcome that we desire for our organization. So that's a negative example.
I mentioned I was working at the YWCA up in Seattle, and the YWCA's motto is empowering women, ending racism. I mean, that's it. That's what they do. And so inherent in those two statements are all of the narratives about women and power and men and power and how they all interact. There are all of the narratives about racism and whether it still exists or not. And then there are all of the social locations of who's working at the organization, who are our clients. The majority of them are women. The majority of the people that are working there are women. What's the demographics? Are we serving predominantly people of color? Are we serving predominantly white communities? How does our staff reflect the communities that we serve? And then also the values. So the values inherent in empowering women are that we believe that women have value. And if we can add to that value, and if we can do our best to empower that value, that's the direction we want to move. And the values inherent in ending racism are that all people are of value, and all people are exist in equality, and we have to move forward. And so as an organization, the YWCA really tries to locate itself and start from that spot. And so you see things like boards that have members of their communities that sit on them. You see things like the demographics of your staff reflect the demographics of your clients. You see things like client focus groups, client caucuses, where the clients have ownership in the process of how the organization works. You see that in things like for the staff, there was the People of Color Caucus, and then there was the White Caucus, where the different groups could sit together and talk about what it meant to be, for me, what it meant to be a white person working in this environment. And then there was the Male Caucus, where the men were able to sit with one another and talk about what that looked like. And so as an organization, they really tried to ground themselves in this idea of location, narratives, and values, and where that goes.